"Get up," one of the men muttered, his voice low and impatient, like he was already bored of the whole thing. Richard Hale didn't move. Rainwater pooled beneath him, cold seeping through the fabric of his $4,000 suit, the kind tailored to fit power, not pavement. His breath came shallow, uneven, each inhale tasting faintly of metal and city dust. Somewhere above, a flickering alley light buzzed, casting sharp, broken shadows that stretched and snapped across the brick walls like something alive. The city wasn't far, just half a block away, but it might as well have been miles. No traffic noise reached here. No footsteps. Just the quiet hum of a place people forgot on purpose. A shoe nudged his side, not hard, just enough to test if he'd react. He didn't. Not because he couldn't, but because something inside him had stalled, like a machine that had never been built to fail suddenly, trying to understand what failure felt like. Richard Hale, the man who owned buildings taller than this entire block, who signed deals worth more than this neighborhood would see in a lifetime, lay still in a narrow alley that smelled faintly of wet cardboard and rust. A laugh echoed, sharp but empty. "Thought you'd be tougher," another voice said. The words didn't carry anger, just dismissal. That stung more than anything else. The rain picked up, soft at first, then steady, tapping against metal dumpsters and dripping from fire escapes in slow, rhythmic patterns. It soaked his hair, flattened it against his forehead, blurred the edges of everything he could see. For a moment, the world reduced itself to sound. Water, breath, the faint scrape of shoes shifting on concrete. Then something changed. It wasn't loud, not dramatic, just different. The rhythm broke. A pause slipped into the air like a missed heartbeat. One of the men turned his head slightly, eyes narrowing toward the far end of the alley. "You lost or something?" he called out, voice sharper now, less certain. There was no answer, just the soft echo of rain hitting asphalt. Then, footsteps. Light. Measured. Not hurried. Not hesitant. Each step landed with quiet certainty, like whoever it was had already decided where they were going long before they got there. She stopped just inside the reach of the flickering light. For a second, she didn't move at all. The hood of her sweatshirt cast a shadow over her face, but not enough to hide the stillness in her posture. No flinch. No glance away. Just presence. Like she belonged there more than anyone else. One of the men scoffed under his breath. "This ain't your business," he said, waving a hand dismissively, already turning back. But she didn't leave. Instead, she tilted her head, just slightly, as if observing something that didn't quite make sense to her. Not fear. Not curiosity. Something closer to assessment. Her voice, when it came, wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. "Your stance is wrong." The words hung in the air, quiet but precise, cutting clean through the noise of the rain. The men froze, not out of intimidation, but confusion. That wasn't the kind of sentence anyone expected to hear in a place like this. One of them let out a short laugh, shaking his head. "You serious right now?" he said, stepping forward a half pace, water splashing under his boot. "Walk away." She didn't move. Not an inch. The light above flickered again, briefly illuminating her face. Young, calm, unshaken. Richard, still on the ground, forced his eyes to focus. His vision swam for a second before settling on her silhouette. A girl. That didn't make sense. Nothing about this made sense. Another step forward. The man's shoulders squared, confidence returning as quickly as it had faltered. "You don't want to be here," he added, slower this time, like he was giving her a chance. She exhaled softly, almost like a sigh, though there was no frustration in it. "Just patience. I know exactly where I am," she said. No tremor. No hesitation. Just truth, spoken like it didn't require belief to exist. The rain continued to fall, steady now, washing over everything. Over the alley, over the man on the ground who had built his life on control and was now watching it slip quietly out of his hands. And for the first time since he hit the pavement, Richard Hale realized something that unsettled him far more than the situation itself. She wasn't here by accident. The man stepped closer, his shoes dragging slightly through the shallow puddles, the sound soft but deliberate, like he was trying to reassert control over something that had slipped for just a second. "You got jokes," he said, though there was a thin edge under his voice now, something tighter than before. Not anger. Not yet. Just uncertainty he did not want to name. The girl did not respond right away. Her eyes moved, not quickly, not nervously, but with quiet intention, tracing the line of his shoulders, the angle of his feet, the way his weight shifted from heel to toe. It did not look like fear. It looked like calculation. Behind him, one of the others let out a short breath, half laugh, half disbelief. "Man, she is serious," he muttered, glancing between them. The alley felt narrower now, like the walls had leaned in just a few inches closer. The flickering light above buzzed again, then steadied for a moment, casting a clearer image of her face. Calm, focused, completely out of place, and yet somehow the only person in control of the space. Richard tried to push himself up, his hand slipping slightly on the wet concrete before finding balance. The movement was small, barely noticeable, but it shifted something in the air. The girl noticed. Her gaze flickered toward him for less than a second, just enough to confirm he was still conscious, still present, then returned to the men in front of her. "You are leaning too far forward," she said, almost conversationally, as if she were correcting someone in a training room instead of standing in a dim alley at night. The man in front of her frowned, irritation surfacing now. "What does that even mean?" he snapped, taking another step, closing the distance to just a few feet. Rain dripped from the edge of his jacket, hitting the ground between them in steady drops. She did not step back. Instead, she shifted slightly, a small adjustment in her stance that most people would not have noticed. But it changed everything. Her weight settled evenly. Her shoulders relaxed. Her hands remained at her sides, open, unthreatening. Stillness, but not passive. The kind of stillness that holds something underneath it. "It means you are off balance," she said. The words were simple. The effect was not. For a brief moment, no one spoke. Even the rain seemed quieter, like it was waiting. The man hesitated, just a fraction, but it was enough. Enough for doubt to slip in. Enough for the rhythm to break again. "You think you know something?" he said, though his voice had lost some of its earlier certainty. "You think you can just walk in here and tell us what to do?" She tilted her head again, the same small motion as before, almost thoughtful. "No," she said. "I know I can." It was not a challenge. It was not a threat. It was a statement. Clean. Uncomplicated. Final. One of the men behind him shifted his stance, glancing toward the street at the end of the alley, as if checking for witnesses that were not there. "This is not worth it," he murmured, low enough that it almost got lost under the sound of the rain. The first man ignored him. Pride had already taken hold. He moved again, faster this time, not lunging, not reckless, but committed enough that the space between them disappeared in a step. And then something subtle happened. Not loud, not dramatic, just precise. The girl moved. A single shift, a controlled turn of her body, her hand lifting just enough to redirect rather than collide. There was no struggle, no drawn-out motion, just a clean interruption of momentum, like a sentence cut short before it could finish. The man stopped, not by force, but because he had nowhere to go. His balance, once solid, now uncertain. His expression changed first. Confusion, sharp and immediate, like he had missed a step he did not know existed. He pulled back instinctively, creating space where there had been none seconds before. The alley exhaled. The other two men stared, their earlier amusement gone, replaced with something quieter. Recognition, not of who she was, but of what she represented. Control, real control, the kind that did not need volume or size to exist. Richard watched from the ground, his thoughts struggling to catch up with what his eyes had just seen. It did not look like strength. It did not look like force. It looked like certainty. And somehow, that unsettled him more than anything that had happened before. The space between them held for a second longer than it should have, like the world itself was deciding what came next. The man who had stepped forward now stood still, his breathing uneven, his eyes fixed on the girl as if trying to solve something that did not fit the rules he understood. Rain slid down his face, tracing along his jaw, dripping from his chin in slow, steady drops. He glanced down at his own feet, adjusting his stance instinctively, as if correcting what she had pointed out without wanting to admit it. Behind him, Logan shifted again, this time more openly, his shoulders turning slightly away from the center of the alley. "This is getting weird," he muttered, his voice lower now, less certain than before. Tyler did not laugh this time. His gaze stayed locked on the girl, watching her the way people watch something unfamiliar that they cannot immediately categorize. Not a threat, not harmless, something in between. The girl did not press forward. She did not take advantage of the moment. She simply stood there, steady, present, as if the outcome had already been decided and she was just waiting for the others to catch up to it. "You should leave," she said, her tone unchanged, calm but firm, carrying just enough weight to land without needing to rise. The first man let out a short breath through his nose, shaking his head slightly, trying to shake off whatever had just happened. "You think that little move means something?" he said, but the question did not come out as strong as he intended. It sounded thinner, stretched. The girl's eyes did not leave his. "It means enough," she replied. Silence followed again, thicker this time. Even the city seemed to hesitate at the edge of the alley, as if unwilling to interrupt. Richard pushed himself up a little more, his back pressing against the damp brick wall behind him. The cold seeped through his shirt, grounding him in a way he had never experienced before. He had spent his life in climate-controlled rooms, in cars with tinted windows, in spaces designed to keep discomfort out. Now, every sensation felt sharper. The chill of the air, the weight of his own breathing, the unfamiliar vulnerability of not being in control. His gaze returned to the girl. She had not looked at him again, not directly, but something about her presence made it clear that she had not forgotten he was there. She was not here for them. She was here for him. That realization settled heavily in his chest. The man in front of her shifted again, this time stepping back a fraction, his foot sliding slightly on the wet surface before finding balance. It was a small retreat, almost unnoticeable, but it changed everything. Power does not leave all at once. It fades, piece by piece, in moments like this. Logan saw it first. "We are done," he said quietly, not asking, not suggesting. Deciding. Tyler nodded once, quick and subtle, his jaw tightening as he took a step backward, creating more space between himself and the center of the alley. The first man hesitated, his pride holding him in place for a second longer, but even that began to crack under the weight of what he could not explain. He looked at her again, searching for something he could push against, something he could dismiss. He did not find it. What he found instead was stillness, confidence without effort, control without force. He exhaled slowly, the tension leaving his shoulders in a way that felt almost involuntary. "This is not worth it," he said finally, echoing Logan's earlier words, though now they carried a different meaning. Not dismissal, acceptance. He took a step back, then another. The three of them moved together after that, not hurried, not running, but leaving all the same, their footsteps fading into the soft rhythm of the rain until the alley returned to silence. The girl did not watch them go. She remained where she was for a moment longer, as if confirming that the shift had fully settled, that the danger had passed without needing to be chased away. Only then did she move. Not toward the street. Toward Richard. Her steps were the same as before. Measured. Quiet. Certain. She stopped a few feet away, close enough to be present, far enough to give space. For the first time, she looked directly at him. Up close, her eyes were steady, clear, holding no judgment, no urgency, just a quiet awareness that felt unfamiliar to him. He opened his mouth, unsure of what he was about to say, unsure of what could even be said in a moment like this. Words had always come easily to him. Deals, negotiations, commands. Now, they felt distant, unnecessary. She studied him for a brief second, taking in the details he could not hide, then gave a small nod, almost to herself. "You are all right," she said, not as a question, but as a conclusion. Richard blinked, caught off guard by the simplicity of it. Not "are you rich?" Not "who are you?" Just that. He swallowed, his voice rough when it finally came. "Why did you stop?" The question hung between them, heavier than he expected. She did not answer right away. Instead, she glanced once toward the end of the alley, where the city lights blurred softly through the rain, then back at him. "Because someone should," she said quietly. And in that moment, Richard Hale, who had spent years believing control came from power, realized he had just witnessed something far rarer. Someone who did not need it at all. The rain softened, not stopping, just easing into a quieter rhythm that made every small sound in the alley feel sharper, more defined, like the world had narrowed its focus to the space between them. Richard shifted against the wall again, slower this time, testing his balance before pushing himself fully upright. His hand pressed briefly against the damp brick, steadying, grounding, then dropped back to his side. Standing felt unfamiliar, not physically, but in a way that reached deeper, like he had stepped into a version of himself he did not recognize. The girl did not move to help him. She did not offer a hand, did not step closer, did not fill the space with unnecessary motion. She simply watched, giving him the room to stand on his own. It was a small thing, almost invisible, but it carried weight. He noticed. "You knew they would leave," he said after a moment, his voice steadier now, though still rough around the edges. It was not quite a question, more like he was testing the shape of the idea out loud. She shook her head slightly. "No," she said. "I knew they could." The distinction landed quietly, but it stayed. Richard frowned faintly, processing it, turning it over the way he would a clause in a contract, looking for the hidden meaning. There was none, just truth, plain and unadorned. He glanced down at his suit, brushing at the damp fabric out of habit more than necessity, then stopped halfway through the motion. It felt pointless here, out of place. The alley did not care what he wore. For a brief second, he almost laughed, but the sound did not come. Instead, he looked back at her. "You talk like this is normal," he said. "Like walking into something like that does not mean anything." She held his gaze, unblinking. "It means something," she replied. "Just not what you think." Another pause followed. But this one was different. Not tense, not uncertain, just quiet. The kind of quiet that lets something settle into place without needing to be explained. A drop of water slid from the edge of her hood, falling to the ground between them. Richard watched it without meaning to, then lifted his eyes again. "You could have walked past," he said. "Most people would have." The words felt heavier as he said them, like they carried more than just observation. They carried expectation, history, a lifetime of people choosing convenience over involvement. She nodded once, acknowledging the truth of it. "Yes," she said simply. "But I did not." No justification, no explanation, just a decision, stated like it had already been made long before this moment. Richard inhaled slowly, the air cool in his lungs, clearing something he had not realized was clouded. He studied her more closely now, not just seeing her, but trying to understand her. The worn edges of her sleeves, the way she stood balanced without tension, the steadiness in her eyes that did not match her age. There was nothing accidental about her presence. Nothing random. "Who are you?" he asked, the question coming out quieter than he intended, less like a demand and more like a genuine search for something he could not define. She did not answer right away. Her gaze shifted briefly past him, toward the street beyond the alley, where distant headlights passed in blurred streaks through the rain. For a moment, it seemed like she might ignore the question entirely. Then she looked back at him. "Someone who was paying attention," she said. The answer was simple, but it did not satisfy the question he had asked. And yet, it felt more honest than anything else he might have expected. Richard exhaled, a faint tension leaving his shoulders as he realized something he rarely admitted to himself. Not everything needed to be explained to be understood. A faint sound drifted in from the street. A car passing. A door closing somewhere far off. The city was still there, continuing as if nothing had happened, as if this small moment in a forgotten alley held no significance at all. But it did. He could feel it. The shift had already begun. "You stopped them without touching them," he said, almost to himself now, the realization forming as he spoke it. "That does not make sense." She tilted her head slightly again, the same thoughtful motion from before. "It makes sense if you are not trying to win," she said. Richard looked at her, confusion flickering briefly across his face. "Then what are you trying to do?" he asked. This time, her answer came without pause. "End it," she said. The words settled between them, quiet and complete. Not defeat, not victory, just an ending, chosen before things could become something else. Richard absorbed that, letting it sit in his mind without rushing to analyze it. For once, he did not need to turn it into strategy or outcome. It simply was. The rain continued to fall, soft and steady, washing over the alley, over the city, over the moment that had already begun to change something he could not yet name. And as he stood there, facing someone who had nothing he would normally measure as power, he realized that for the first time in a long while, he was not thinking about control at all. The word lingered longer than anything else she had said. End it. Not win. Not fight. Not prove anything. Just end it. Richard let that settle, the meaning stretching out quietly in his mind, reshaping something he had always believed without ever questioning. For years, every situation in his world had been framed as a negotiation, a contest, a structure where someone gained and someone lost. That was how power worked. That was how you stayed on top. But what she described did not fit that model. It did not require dominance. It did not even require recognition. It simply required clarity. He looked at her again, more carefully this time, as if trying to understand not just what she had done, but how she had decided to do it in the first place. That is not how most people think, he said, his voice quieter now, less guarded. She gave a small shrug, almost imperceptible. Most people are busy trying to be right, she replied. That keeps things going longer than they need to. The rain tapped steadily against the metal surfaces around them, filling the spaces between words with a soft, consistent rhythm. Richard nodded slowly, though he was not entirely sure he agreed, or if he simply recognized something true in what she said. He shifted his weight, testing his footing again, then straightened a little more, the posture coming back to him piece by piece, though it no longer felt the same. There was less tension in it now, less urgency to project something outward. You handled that like you have done it before, he said. This time, it was a question, even if it did not sound like one. She did not answer immediately. Her gaze drifted again, not away from him, but past him, as if the memory of something else had briefly entered the space between them. When she spoke, her voice remained steady. I have seen enough to know how it starts, she said, and how it usually ends. Richard followed the direction of her gaze without thinking, looking toward the mouth of the alley where the city lights continued their distant movement. For a moment, he tried to imagine what she had seen, what experiences had shaped that kind of certainty, that kind of calm. It was not something you learned from books or boardrooms. It came from somewhere else, somewhere closer to reality than anything he was used to. He exhaled slowly, feeling the air settle differently in his chest now. You said you were paying attention, he said. To what? She looked back at him, her expression unchanged, but her eyes holding something slightly deeper now, like the surface had shifted just enough to reveal what lay beneath it. To people, she said. To what they do when they think no one is watching. The answer landed heavier than the others. Richard felt it in a way he did not expect, like a quiet mirror being held up in front of him. He had spent years believing he understood people. Investors, competitors, partners. He could read a room in seconds, anticipate decisions before they were spoken. But this was different. This was not about strategy. It was about something more basic, more human. He let out a faint breath, almost a laugh, though it carried no humor. That is a dangerous habit, he said. She tilted her head slightly, considering that. Only if you ignore what you see, she replied. Another pause followed, but it did not feel empty. It felt full, like something important had just been placed in the space between them, something neither of them needed to rush to move. Richard glanced down the alley again, then back at her. Thought forming slowly, unexpectedly. You do not seem surprised by any of this, he said. Not by them. Not by me. She shook her head once. No, she said. People are consistent. The simplicity of it caught him off guard again. Consistent, he repeated. She nodded. They show you who they are, she said. The question is whether you believe them the first time. Richard fell silent after that. The words did not require a response. They required reflection. And for once, he did not push past that. He let it sit, let it unfold in its own time. The rain continued to fall, soft and steady, washing over the alley, over the city, over the version of himself he had carried into this night. Something about it felt like a reset. Not dramatic, not visible, but real. He looked at her one more time, the question already forming before he spoke it. What happens now, he asked. It was not about the men, not about the alley. It was about everything that came after. She held his gaze for a moment, then glanced briefly toward the street again, where the world was still moving, still waiting. When she answered, her voice was quiet, but certain. Now you decide what you do with what you just saw, she said. And for the first time in a long time, Richard Hale realized that the next move did not belong to the person with the most power. It belonged to the one who understood what it meant. The question stayed in the air even after she finished speaking, like the alley itself was holding on to it, waiting to see what he would do with it. Richard did not answer right away. He had spent most of his life responding instantly, filling silence before it could grow, controlling conversations before they could shift away from him. But this felt different. The pause did not threaten him. It invited him. He looked down briefly at his hands, turning them slightly, as if expecting to see something new there, something that had changed in the last few minutes. They looked the same. Steady, clean, controlled. But they did not feel the same. There was a weight in them now, not physical, but something closer to awareness. He lifted his gaze back to her. She had not moved. Not once since she asked him to decide. The patience in that alone said more than anything else she could have added. She was not waiting for him to impress her. She was waiting to see if he would be honest. "I do not know," he said finally. The words came out slower than he expected, like they had to pass through something unfamiliar before they reached his voice. It was not an answer he was used to giving. Not in business. Not in life. But it was the only one that felt real. She nodded once, as if that was enough. As if uncertainty, when it was genuine, carried more value than confidence that had not been tested. "That is a start," she said. The simplicity of it caught him off guard again. No judgment. No correction. Just acknowledgement. The rain continued its quiet rhythm, soft drops tapping against the ground, washing away the faint marks left behind by what had happened earlier. The alley no longer felt tense. It felt still, like something had resolved itself without needing to be forced. Richard shifted slightly, then took a small step forward, away from the wall, testing the space with a new kind of awareness. He was not reclaiming control. He was stepping into it differently. "You said people are consistent," he said, returning to her earlier words. "What did you see in me?" The question came out more direct than the others, but there was no edge to it. No defense. Just curiosity, honest and unfiltered. She studied him for a moment, longer than before, as if weighing not what to say, but whether to say it at all. When she spoke, her tone did not change. It remained calm, grounded, steady. "I saw someone who is used to being listened to," she said, "and not used to listening back." The words landed without force, but they carried weight all the same. Richard did not flinch. He did not argue. He simply absorbed them, letting them settle where they needed to. A part of him wanted to respond, to explain, to justify. But another part, quieter and newer, understood that explanation was not the point. He exhaled slowly, the breath leaving him more evenly this time. "That is fair," he said. She gave a slight nod, acknowledging not the words, but the acceptance behind them. The space between them shifted again, not in tension, but in understanding. It was subtle, but it was there. Richard glanced toward the end of the alley, where the city lights flickered faintly through the rain, then back at her. "And now?" he asked, the question softer this time, less about direction and more about possibility. She looked at him, her expression unchanged, but her eyes holding something just a little warmer now, like the edge of something human breaking through the calm. "Now you get to decide if that changes," she said. Not command, not instruction, just an opening. A choice placed in front of him without pressure. Richard let that sit, feeling the unfamiliar shape of it settle into his thoughts. Change had always been something he directed, something he controlled from the outside. But this was internal, quiet, unseen, and somehow more significant than anything he had ever signed or built. He nodded once, not as a conclusion, but as a recognition. A beginning. The rain softened even more, almost fading into the background now, leaving behind the faint scent of wet pavement and something cleaner underneath it. The city beyond the alley continued its movement, steady and indifferent, but Richard no longer felt separate from it. He felt present. For the first time that night, he noticed the space around him without measuring it, without assigning value to it. Just noticing. He looked at her again, a new question forming, but this one carried something different. Not curiosity, not analysis. Respect. "You did not have to stay," he said, after they left. She tilted her head slightly, the familiar motion now carrying a different meaning. "No," she said, "but you did not have to stand up either." The words met in the middle, quiet and balanced, like two sides of the same truth. Richard felt something shift again, deeper this time, like a piece of something old had finally moved out of place. He gave a small nod, more to himself than to her. The moment stretched, not awkward, not uncertain, just complete. And in that stillness, without needing anything else to happen, Richard Hale understood something he had never considered before. Power could change a situation, but presence could change a person. The quiet that followed did not feel empty. It felt full, like something invisible had settled into place between them, something neither of them needed to name for it to exist. Richard shifted his stance again, but this time it was not to regain balance. It was simply to stand more naturally, to let his body align without forcing it. The difference was subtle, but it was there. He could feel it. The alley no longer pressed in around him. It no longer felt like a place he needed to escape. It was just a place. Temporary. Passing. Like the moment itself. He glanced toward the street again, watching the blurred headlights move through the rain, then looked back at her. "You said people show you who they are," he said, his voice steady now, grounded in something quieter than before. "What did I show you tonight?" The question lingered, not sharp, not defensive, but open in a way that would have felt impossible to him just an hour earlier. She did not answer immediately. Her gaze remained on him, steady, thoughtful, as if she was not just considering the question, but measuring whether he was ready to hear the answer. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the same calm weight it always had. "You showed me you can stop," she said. Richard blinked slightly, caught off guard by the phrasing. "Stop," he repeated. She nodded once. "Most people do not," she said. "They keep going. They react. They push. They try to take something back." Her eyes held his, not challenging, just clear. "You stopped." The words settled into him slowly, like something unfamiliar finding its place. He thought back to the moment, to the way everything had shifted, to the instinct he had felt to respond, to regain control, to say something, do something, assert something. And then he had not. He had stayed still, not out of weakness, not out of fear, but because something in him had recognized that moving forward would only make things worse. He exhaled softly, the realization unfolding as he allowed himself to see it clearly. "I did not think of it that way," he said. She gave a small nod, as if that was expected. "You do not have to think of it," she replied. "You just have to notice it." The rain had slowed now to a light drizzle, the steady rhythm fading into something softer, almost distant. The air felt different too. Cleaner. Cooler. Richard drew in a slow breath, letting it fill his lungs fully this time. Not rushed, not shallow. It grounded him in a way that felt new. He looked at her again, really looked this time, not trying to analyze or categorize, just seeing her as she was. Present. Steady. Unmoved by things that would have shaken most people. "You are not what people expect," he said quietly. It was not a compliment. It was an observation. She tilted her head slightly, the familiar motion carrying a hint of something lighter now, almost like amusement. "People expect what they are used to," she said. "That does not make it accurate." Richard let out a faint breath, something close to a laugh this time, though it remained soft, restrained. "That sounds like something I should have learned a long time ago," he said. She did not respond to that directly. Instead, she glanced once more toward the end of the alley, where the city waited, unchanged, indifferent, ready to continue as if this moment had never happened. Then she looked back at him. "You still can," she said. Not encouragement, not pressure, just a fact. Richard nodded slowly, feeling the weight of that settle into him. Not as a burden, but as an option. A choice that had always been there, just never recognized. He shifted his shoulders slightly, releasing the last of the tension he had been holding without realizing it. The movement felt small, but it carried meaning. He was not the same man who had walked into this alley. Not entirely. Something had shifted. Quietly. Permanently. He met her gaze again, a new question forming, but this one felt different from the others. It was not about understanding the moment. It was about understanding her. "What made you pay attention?" he asked. The question hung gently between them, not urgent, not demanding, just honest. She was quiet for a moment, her eyes softening just slightly, as if the answer came from somewhere deeper than the others had. When she spoke, her voice remained calm, but there was something warmer beneath it now, something more human. "Because I know what it feels like when no one does," she said. The words landed with a quiet force, not heavy, but undeniable. Richard felt them settle in his chest, not as something to analyze, but something to understand. He did not ask anything further. He did not need to. The meaning was already there. Clear. Complete. The rain slowed to almost nothing, the last few drops falling softly around them. The alley stood still, holding the final moments of something that had already changed both of them in ways neither fully understood yet. And as Richard stood there, facing someone who had nothing to gain from being here, he realized that what she had given him was not help, not rescue, not even protection. It was awareness. And once you had that, there was no going back. The last words she spoke did not echo. They settled, quietly, deep, like something that had always been there, but had never been acknowledged until now. Richard did not respond immediately. He did not need to. The meaning had already reached him, not through logic, but through something slower, more permanent. He stood there for a moment longer, the faint dampness of the air brushing against his skin, the scent of rain and concrete still lingering around them. The alley no longer felt like a place where something had happened. It felt like a place where something had been revealed. He shifted his gaze slightly, taking in the space again, but this time with different eyes. The walls, the ground, the dim light overhead. Nothing had changed, and yet everything had. When he looked back at her, she had already taken a small step backward, not leaving yet, but no longer rooted in place the way she had been before. It was subtle, but it signaled something. The moment was closing. "You are leaving," he said, not as a question, but as an observation. She nodded once. "There is nothing left to do here," she replied. The words were simple, but they carried a quiet finality. Richard felt a slight shift in his chest, something unfamiliar, something that did not quite have a name. Not urgency, not resistance, something closer to reluctance. He was not ready for this to end, not because of the situation, but because of what it had become. "Wait," he said, the word coming out before he had fully decided to say it. She paused, not turning away, but not stepping forward either. Just stopping, giving space for whatever came next. Richard took a small step toward her, not closing the distance entirely, but enough to show intention. "I do not even know your name," he said. The sentence felt strangely important, more than it should have been. She looked at him for a moment, her expression unchanged, but her eyes holding that same quiet awareness. "Amara," she said. The name landed softly, but it stayed. Richard repeated it in his mind once, committing it without effort. "Amara," he said aloud, more to confirm it than to ask anything further. She gave a slight nod. "Richard," she replied. He paused for a fraction of a second, surprised. "You knew," he said. It was not disbelief. It was realization. She tilted her head slightly, the now familiar gesture carrying a hint of something almost gentle. "You are not hard to recognize," she said. There was no flattery in it. No judgment either. Just fact. Richard exhaled quietly, absorbing that, but it did not land the way it normally would have. There was no pride in it. No sense of identity tied to the recognition. It felt distant, almost irrelevant compared to everything else that had just happened. "And you still stayed," he said. The statement carried more weight now, more understanding. She held his gaze, steady as always. "Names do not change what someone needs in a moment," she said. The simplicity of it settled into him again, reshaping something he had always assumed was fixed. For a long time, his name had opened doors, closed others, defined how people approached him before he even spoke. But here, in this alley, it had meant nothing. And somehow, that made everything clearer. He nodded slowly, accepting that truth without needing to reshape it into something else. A faint breeze moved through the alley, carrying the last traces of rain with it, cool against the skin. The city beyond continued its quiet movement, steady and indifferent, waiting for both of them to step back into it. Amara shifted her weight slightly, preparing to turn. The moment was ending. This time, Richard felt it fully. He did not try to stop it, but he did not let it pass without one more question. "Will I see you again?" he asked. The words came out softer than anything he had said before, not out of uncertainty, but out of respect for the space they occupied. She considered the question for a moment, her gaze steady, thoughtful. Then she gave a small, almost imperceptible shake of her head. "That depends," she said. Richard waited, not interrupting, not pushing. "On what?" he asked. She looked at him, and for the first time, there was a faint shift in her expression, something warmer, something closer to a quiet understanding. "On whether you are still paying attention," she said. The answer did not give him certainty. It gave him something else. Responsibility. He nodded once, slowly, the weight of it settling into him without resistance. "I will," he said. Not a promise. Not a declaration, just a decision. She held his gaze for one last moment, as if measuring the truth in his words, then gave a slight nod in return. No approval, no doubt, just acknowledgement. And then, without another word, she turned. Her steps were the same as before. Light, measured, certain. She moved toward the end of the alley, toward the city that had never stopped moving, her figure gradually blending into the dim light and distant motion until she was no longer distinct from the rest of it. Richard stood where he was, watching until she disappeared completely, until there was nothing left to follow but the memory of her presence. The alley was quiet again, empty, but not the same. He remained there for a moment longer, letting the silence settle, letting everything that had just happened find its place inside him. Then, slowly, he turned toward the street. Not with urgency, not with purpose shaped by habit, but with awareness. And as he stepped out of the alley and back into the world he thought he understood, he realized something had changed in a way that could not be undone. He was no longer just looking. He was seeing. The city did not pause for him. It never had. As Richard stepped out of the alley, the world moved exactly as it had before. Cars passing in steady lines, tires hissing softly against wet asphalt, distant voices blending into the low hum of a night that belonged to everyone and no one at the same time. But something inside him did pause. Not physically, not visibly, just enough to create a space between what he had been and what he was beginning to understand. He stood at the edge of the sidewalk for a moment, the dim alley light behind him fading into the broader glow of street lamps and storefront reflections. Rain still clung lightly to the air, not falling anymore, but present, like a memory that had not fully left. People passed by him without slowing, coats pulled tight, heads angled down, each one moving with purpose, with direction, with somewhere to be. He watched them differently now, not as part of a system, not as motion to be ignored, but as individuals, each carrying something unseen. A man adjusting his collar against the cold. A woman checking her phone with quiet urgency. A teenager laughing softly, unaware of anything beyond the moment in front of him. Richard noticed details he would have dismissed before. Small things, human things, and for the first time, they did not feel irrelevant. He stepped forward onto the sidewalk, blending into the flow, but not disappearing into it. Not the way he used to. His phone buzzed faintly in his pocket, the sound sharp against the quiet awareness that had settled into him. He hesitated for a fraction of a second before pulling it out. The screen lit up instantly. 3 missed calls. 2 messages. 1 email marked urgent. The names attached to them were familiar. Expected. Important. The world he knew, reaching back for him, reminding him of everything that had been waiting just outside the alley. He stared at the screen for a moment, his thumb hovering over the notifications. Normally, he would have responded instantly, cleared them, controlled them, moved forward without hesitation. But now he paused, not because he did not care, but because he was aware of the choice. He lowered the phone slowly, letting the screen dim, then slipped back into his pocket without opening a single message. The decision felt small, but it was not. A car passed close to the curb, headlights cutting briefly across his face, reflecting in his eyes before disappearing down the block. He exhaled slowly, the breath steady, measured, different from before. The world had not changed, but he had, and that changed everything about how he moved through it. He began walking, not with urgency, not with the sharp direction that had always defined him, but with something quieter, intentional. A few steps in, he slowed again, his attention caught by something simple. A man stood near a closed storefront, struggling with a stack of boxes, adjusting his grip again and again as one of them slipped slightly out of alignment. People passed by him without noticing, or noticing and choosing not to engage. It was a familiar scene. One Richard had seen countless times without ever registering it as anything more than background. He stopped. The moment stretched, subtle but clear. The same kind of moment he had been in earlier. A choice, unspoken, waiting. He felt it before he fully understood it. The instinct to keep walking, to stay on path, to not involve himself. And then, something else. Quieter, stronger. He stepped off his path and moved toward the man. "You want a hand?" he asked, his voice even, calm, without expectation. The man looked up, surprised, blinking once as if confirming what he had heard. Yeah," he said, adjusting the top box again. Richard reached out, steadying the stack, taking a portion of the weight without effort. The motion was simple, practical, but it carried something else beneath it. Something new. They adjusted the boxes together, shifting the balance until the man could hold them securely. Got it, the man said after a second, nodding once. Richard stepped back, giving space again, the same way it had been given to him earlier. Thanks, the man added, a hint of relief in his voice. Richard nodded once in return. No explanation. No need for one. Just acknowledgement. He turned and continued walking, the moment already settling into something quiet but lasting. As he moved through the city, the rhythm of his steps matched something different now. Not the pace of deadlines or expectations, but the pace of awareness, of presence. And somewhere, not far but not visible, the echo of a voice remained steady in his mind. Pay attention. He did not look back toward the alley. He did not need to. What had happened there was not behind him. It was with him. And for the first time in a long time, Richard Hale understood that the most important shifts did not happen in boardrooms or contracts or headlines. They happened in moments no one else saw. Moments where no one was watching. Except now he was. The rhythm of the city wrapped around him as he walked, steady and familiar, yet somehow different now, like a song he had heard his entire life, but was only just beginning to understand. The streetlights stretched long reflections across the wet pavement, turning every passing car into a moving ribbon of light, every storefront window into a shifting mirror of the world outside it. Richard moved through it without rushing, his pace no longer dictated by urgency, but by awareness. Each step felt placed, not automatic. Each moment felt chosen. His phone buzzed again in his pocket, sharper this time, more insistent, as if the world he had stepped away from was reaching harder, pulling him back into its gravity. He slowed, then stopped beneath a streetlight, the soft glow catching the edges of his face. For a moment, he did not reach for the device. He simply stood there, feeling the vibration fade, listening to the quiet space it left behind. Then, slowly, he took it out. The screen lit up again. More messages. More calls. The same names. The same expectations. But now, instead of reacting, he observed. He read the names not as obligations, but as information. He noticed the urgency in the subject lines, the assumptions built into each notification, the silent demand that he return to the role he had always played. He stared at it for a few seconds longer, then did something he had never done before. He powered the phone off. The screen went black. No glow. No connection. Just silence. The absence of noise felt louder than anything else. For a brief moment, he stood there, holding the darkened device in his hand, feeling the weight of what that action meant. Not rebellion. Not escape. Just a pause. A deliberate step out of the constant stream he had never questioned. He slipped the phone back into his pocket, the absence of its presence already shifting the way the world felt around him. He looked up again, taking in the street with clearer eyes. A couple stood near a corner, speaking quietly, their voices blending into the night. A delivery driver leaned against his van, checking a clipboard with tired focus. A woman crossed the street carefully, her shoes avoiding the deeper puddles with small, practiced adjustments. None of them noticed him, and for once, he did not expect them to. There was no identity to project, no presence to assert, just observation. He resumed walking, turning onto a quieter block where the noise softened and the spaces between people widened. The buildings here were older, their brick facades worn but steady, their windows glowing softly from within. Life happening behind glass, unseen but constant. As he passed one of the buildings, he slowed again, something catching his attention. Through a partially open doorway. Inside, a small lobby, dimly lit. A maintenance worker knelt near the entrance, tools spread out beside him, adjusting something at the base of the door. The man's movements were careful, precise, but there was a slight hesitation in them, like he was working through a problem that was not immediately obvious. Richard watched for a second, unnoticed, the scene simple and ordinary. Then, without overthinking, he stepped closer to the doorway. "Everything all right?" he asked, his voice carrying just enough to be heard without interrupting. The man looked up, surprised, his expression shifting from concentration to mild confusion. "Yeah, just a hinge issue," he said, gesturing toward the door. "It keeps sticking." Richard nodded, stepping inside just enough to see the angle, the way the door met the frame, the slight misalignment that caused resistance. He crouched slightly, not taking over, just observing alongside him. "Looks like it is pulling unevenly," he said after a moment. "Top side might be tighter than the bottom." The man followed his gaze, adjusting his position, testing the door again with that in mind. It moved differently this time. Smoother. Not perfect, but closer. "Huh," the man said, a small smile forming. "Yeah, that might be it." He adjusted the hinge slightly, tightening one side, loosening the other, then tested the door again. It opened cleanly. No resistance. "Well, I will be," he muttered, a hint of satisfaction in his voice. He looked up at Richard, curiosity replacing the earlier confusion. "You do this kind of work?" he asked. Richard paused for a fraction of a second, then shook his head lightly. "No," he said. "Just paying attention." The words came out naturally, without effort, and as soon as he said them, he recognized them. Not as something he had created, but as something he had learned. The man nodded slowly, as if the answer made more sense than it should have. "Well, I appreciate it," he said. Richard gave a small nod in return, then stepped back out onto the sidewalk, leaving the man to finish his work. As he continued walking, the city did not feel smaller. It felt clearer. Every movement, every interaction, every unnoticed moment carried something he had never allowed himself to see before. And somewhere in that quiet awareness, without needing to say it out loud, Richard understood something that would stay with him long after this night was over. Change did not arrive with noise. It arrived with attention. And once you learn to hold it, even the smallest moments could shift everything. The street grew quieter as he moved farther from the main avenue, the sound of traffic fading into a distant hum that no longer demanded attention. Richard walked without checking the time, without calculating distance, without measuring the value of where he was going. For years, every step he took had been tied to an outcome, a result, a purpose that could be defined and tracked. Now, the purpose felt different. Less visible, more real. He turned onto a block lined with older buildings, their windows dim but warm, their presence steady against the night. A small diner sat on the corner, its neon sign flickering faintly, casting a soft red glow onto the wet sidewalk. Inside, a few people sat scattered across booths, their movements slow, unhurried, the kind of pace that did not belong to the world he was used to. He paused outside the window, not intending to go in, just observing. A waitress moved between tables, balancing a tray with quiet efficiency, her expression focused but calm. A man in a corner booth stirred his coffee absent-mindedly, staring at nothing in particular. Another person sat alone, reading something on a folded piece of paper, lips moving slightly, as if repeating the words to himself. No one noticed Richard standing there. No one reacted to him. And for once, that absence did not feel like a loss. It felt like clarity. He stepped away from the window and continued walking, the rhythm of his steps matching the quiet pace around him. A few yards ahead, he noticed a bus stop shelter, its glass panels fogged slightly from the contrast between the cool air outside and the warmth inside. A woman sat on the bench, her shoulders slightly hunched, her hands wrapped around a paper cup, holding onto its warmth. Beside her, a young boy leaned against her side, his eyes half closed, fighting sleep. Richard slowed as he approached, not out of obligation, but because something in the scene held his attention. The boy shifted slightly, his head slipping from the woman's shoulder for a moment before she gently adjusted him back into place without breaking her stillness. It was a small movement, almost invisible, but it carried something steady, something constant. Richard stopped just beyond the shelter, not intruding, just observing the quiet exchange. The woman glanced up briefly, her eyes meeting his for a second. There was no recognition, no expectation, just acknowledgement of another presence passing through the same space. Then she looked back down at the boy, her focus returning to what mattered in that moment. Richard nodded slightly, more to himself than to her, then continued walking. The city did not feel like a system anymore. It felt like a collection of moments, each one separate, each one complete. He turned another corner, the street narrowing further, the buildings closer together, the light softer. A small storefront caught his eye, its display window filled with simple items, nothing expensive, nothing designed to impress, just objects placed with care. He slowed again, his reflection faintly visible in the glass, distorted slightly by the angle and the light. For a moment, he studied it. Not the suit, not the details, just the outline, the presence. It looked the same, but it did not feel the same. He reached into his pocket, pulling out his phone again, turning it over in his hand without powering it on. The screen remained dark, reflecting only a faint outline of his face. He held it there for a second, then slid it back into his pocket without hesitation. There was nothing on it he needed right now. The realization came easily, without conflict. He resumed walking, his steps steady, his pace unforced. A faint sound reached him from farther down the street. Music. Soft. Unpolished. He followed it without thinking, drawn not by curiosity, but by presence. Around the corner, a man stood beneath a streetlight, holding a guitar, playing quietly to no one in particular. The notes were not perfect. The rhythm wavered slightly, but there was something honest in it. Something unfiltered. A few people passed by without stopping. One slowed for a second, listened, then kept moving. The man did not look up. He did not perform for attention. He simply played. Richard stopped a few feet away, standing in the edge of the light, listening. The sound filled the space without asking for anything in return. It existed on its own, complete. He stood there longer than he expected, letting the notes settle, letting the moment stretch without interruption. When the man finished, he did not look around for approval. He simply adjusted his grip on the guitar and began again, as if the act itself was enough. Richard reached into his pocket, not for his phone this time, but for his wallet. He pulled out a bill, stepped forward quietly, and placed it into the open case at the man's feet. No words, no acknowledgement, just a gesture. The man gave a small nod without stopping his playing, his focus remaining on the music. Richard stepped back, returning to the edge of the light, then turned and continued walking. The sound of the guitar followed him for a few steps, then faded into the background of the city. As he moved forward, the night no longer felt like something to move through. It felt like something to experience. And somewhere in that quiet shift, without needing to name it, Richard understood something that would stay with him long after this moment passed. He was no longer searching for control. He was learning how to be present. And that changed everything. The music faded behind him, not abruptly, but gradually, like a memory that chose not to linger too loudly. Richard continued down the street, his steps steady, his pace unforced, each movement guided less by intention and more by awareness. The city felt different now, not quieter, not slower, but clearer, as if something invisible had been removed from between him and everything around him. He noticed the way light pooled beneath street lamps, the way shadows stretched and softened across the pavement, the way distant voices blended into a rhythm that no longer felt like noise. He turned onto a broader avenue, where the buildings rose higher, glass and steel reflecting the last traces of moisture in the air. This was closer to the world he knew. Familiar, structured, controlled. But even here, something had shifted. He could feel it in the way he stood, in the way he moved, in the way he observed without immediately assigning value or outcome. A large office building stood ahead, its lobby lights still on, security desk visible through the glass doors. His building, the place where everything he had built existed in tangible form. He slowed as he approached, his reflection appearing again in the glass, clearer this time, more defined under the bright interior lighting. He stopped just outside the entrance, looking at it, not with pride, not with ownership, but with a kind of distance he had never allowed himself before. Inside, a security guard sat behind the desk, flipping through a magazine, the posture relaxed, unguarded in a way that suggested routine rather than vigilance. The guard glanced up as Richard entered, his expression shifting instantly from casual to alert recognition. "Mr. Hale," he said, straightening slightly, setting the magazine aside. The tone was respectful, practiced, expected. Richard paused for a moment, standing just inside the lobby, the polished floor reflecting the overhead lights in clean, perfect lines. He looked at the guard, really looked, noticing the slight crease in his uniform sleeve, the way his eyes adjusted quickly, the quiet effort behind the professional composure. "Good evening," Richard said. His voice was calm, but different, less distant. The guard blinked once, surprised by the tone more than the words, then nodded. "Good evening, sir." Richard gave a small nod in return, then walked past the desk, his steps echoing softly in the open space. The elevator doors stood ahead, sleek, reflective, waiting. He approached, pressing the call button, watching the light above it flicker to life. The wait was brief, but it felt longer. Not because of impatience, but because he was present for it. The doors opened with a soft chime, revealing the empty interior. He stepped inside, turning to face the mirrored wall as the doors closed behind him. For a moment, he saw himself clearly. The suit, still damp at the edges. The posture, slightly altered. The expression, quieter, less defined by control and more by awareness. He held that gaze, not analyzing, not correcting, just seeing. The elevator began to move, smooth and silent, ascending through the building he had designed, the structure he had shaped, the environment he had controlled for years. Floor numbers lit up one by one, marking progress, marking movement, marking a path he had taken countless times before. But this time, it felt different. Not because the destination had changed, but because he had. The doors opened onto the top floor, revealing a corridor lined with glass walls, each office dark except for the one at the far end. His office. Light still on. Waiting. He stepped out, his footsteps quieter now, absorbed by the carpet, his presence less defined by sound and more by intention. As he walked down the corridor, he passed the offices of people who relied on him, people who expected him to lead, to decide, to control outcomes they could not. He had always seen those spaces as extensions of his influence. Now he saw them as something else. Lives, work, effort, independent of him, even if connected to him. He reached his office door and paused, his hand resting lightly on the handle. For a moment, he did not open it. He simply stood there, feeling the weight of everything behind it. Decisions, power, expectations, the world he had built, and the version of himself that had existed within it. He inhaled slowly, the breath steady, grounding, then exhaled just as evenly. Then he opened the door. The office was exactly as he had left it. Clean, precise, ordered, papers arranged neatly on the desk, screens dark but ready. A space designed for control. He stepped inside, the door closing softly behind him, sealing the quiet within. He walked to the desk, placing his hands lightly on its surface, feeling the smoothness, the familiarity, the structure of something he had once defined himself by. Then, without sitting, without reaching for anything, he stepped back. The movement was small, but it carried meaning. He looked around the room one more time, not as an owner, not as a figure of authority, but as someone seeing it clearly for the first time. Then, slowly, he reached into his pocket, pulling out his phone. He held it for a moment, the screen still dark, then pressed the button. It powered on, the light returning, the world reconnecting. Messages, calls, expectations. But this time, as he looked at it, something was different. He was not being pulled into it. He was choosing how to step into it. And that choice, quiet as it was, changed everything. The glow of the phone screen reflected faintly in Richard's eyes, but this time, it did not take over his attention. It sat in his hand like any other object. Useful, but no longer in control. Notifications stacked across the display, urgent in tone, demanding in structure, each one a thread pulling him back toward the version of himself that had always responded first and thought later. He looked at them, not dismissing them, not ignoring them, but seeing them clearly for what they were. Requests, expectations, noise shaped too. Feel important. His thumb hovered for a moment, then moved, not in the direction it always had, but with intention. He opened a single message. Not the most urgent, not the most powerful sender. Just one. He read it slowly, taking in each word without rushing, without scanning for outcome. When he finished, he responded with a few simple lines. Clear, direct, no excess. Then he closed it. He did not move to the next message immediately. He set the phone down on the desk instead, screen facing down, the light disappearing once more. The silence that followed did not feel empty. It felt earned. He stepped away from the desk again, moving toward the window that stretched across the far wall of his office. The city lay below him, vast and layered, lights stretching out in every direction, each one representing something happening beyond his reach, beyond his control. For years, he had looked at this view as something he commanded, a map of influence, A network of decisions tied back to him. Now he saw something else. Lives. Moments. People moving through their own stories, unseen, unmeasured, complete without his awareness. He placed a hand lightly against the glass, feeling the cool surface beneath his palm. It grounded him, not in power, but in presence. Somewhere down there, in a part of the city that did not show up on any of his reports or forecasts, a girl named Amara had stepped into a moment no one else claimed and changed it without asking for anything in return. She had not needed recognition. She had not needed authority. She had simply been present. And that had been enough. Richard closed his eyes briefly, not to escape, but to hold on to the clarity that had followed him out of that alley and into this room. It was still there, quiet, steady, unshaken by the walls around him. When he opened them again, the city looked the same. But he did not. He turned back toward the desk, walking slowly, not with hesitation, but with awareness of each step. He picked up the phone again, this time unlocking it fully. The messages were still there. The expectations had not changed, but his relationship to them had. He opened another message, read it fully, then paused before responding. Not reacting, choosing. The words he typed were fewer than before. Clearer. Without the need to control every outcome, only to guide what mattered. He sent it, then set the phone aside again. This time, he did not reach for it immediately after. Instead, he moved to the chair behind his desk and sat down, not collapsing into it, but settling into it with intention. The chair did not feel like a throne anymore. It felt like a position. Temporary. Functional. A place to act from, not define himself by. His gaze drifted across the room, taking in the details he had designed, the structure he had built, the environment he had controlled so precisely. It all remained, but it no longer defined the boundaries of who he was. He leaned back slightly, exhaling slowly, letting the moment stretch without filling it. No calls, no commands, just quiet. Then, almost without thinking, he reached for a pen and a blank sheet of paper. Not a report, not a contract, just empty space. He stared at it for a second, then wrote a single line. Not a plan, not a strategy, just a reminder. Pay attention. He looked at the words for a moment, then set the pen down. The simplicity of it carried more weight than anything else on his desk. He did not need to explain it. He only needed to follow it. The city outside continued its movement, unchanged, unaware of the shift that had taken place in a single office high above its streets. But that did not matter. Change did not need to be seen to be real. It only needed to be lived. Richard stood again, walking back to the window one last time, his reflection faint against the glass, blending with the lights beyond it. He did not look like a different man, but he was, not because something had been added, but because something unnecessary had been removed. He no longer needed to prove control. He no longer needed to dominate every moment. He only needed to be present in it. And somewhere, beyond the reach of his view, in a part of the city that did not care about titles or power, a quiet truth remained steady. She was not rich. She was not powerful, but she had made him remember what decency felt like. And that was enough.